So thanks, guys. Thanks for taking the time to step into this and, kind of, I'm learning as much as you as I step into these, how breath associates with some of the personal practices that we're doing and holding space for clients. And one thing that I came over, and Jared, you haven't been to the other breath classes. We've had a bunch of them that had to do with the endocrine system, the nervous system, and really what breath is actually helping us do with a couple of things: connecting with the body, quieting the mind, energizing the body, giving the body oxygen sometimes when we're not breathing as deeply, giving a rhythm to the body, which then associates to having a deeper somatic connection and having a glandular secretion that tends to be up-leveled compared to down-leveled. So breath is, I'm not surprised in the medical industry, people are not teaching breath, because once you teach somebody they have it for life and it doesn't cost anything. So there's not a lot of profit in it. But from a standpoint of serving people, particularly people that are dysregulated, we can give them lots of prescriptions in order to re-regulate them. But what I found is that process it's hit and miss. I talk to a lot of psychiatrists and they try one thing and it doesn't quite work, and there's a bunch of side effects, so they down that and they add another one until they find kind of the right mix for the individual. But there's tends to be a lot of side effects and unwanted effects by having prescription regulation, and particularly over long periods of time. I equate it to something like bodybuilding, where somebody can get quite big by taking steroids, but what they're doing is they're putting testosterone in their body, and their body naturally stops creating testosterone. So then when your body stops creating testosterone, it's very hard to get off it, because your body then has like a rebound effect where it has to start back up. And that's where the whole titration process comes in. What I found with breath over the years that I've been working with people is that breath is just the natural way of bringing rhythm and awareness and energy and sensitivity to the body, so the body can regulate itself. And what we're going to be stepping into today is what's called the window of tolerance. And have both of you, I know, Brian, you've learned that through Hakomi, right?
Joe.
How about you, Jared? I think you're muted.
Yeah, I've done some breath work, not through Hakomi so much, but okay. Is that what you asked? Sorry.
Do you have any awareness of the window of tolerance?
Oh yes, and yes, I do. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So why don't we just do this? Is we'll step right into some breath practice and what I refer to as breath suspensions. And this is becoming quite popular in a lot of different sports. A lot of people that are pushing the limits of what it is to stress the body in sports or in outdoor activities or in different environments. One distinction, though, is there's a difference between breath holding, which is, effortful, trying to hold your breath for as long as can. It's kind of like what a little kid would do, as if you had asked them to hold their breath, compared to breath suspension, where you can see someone like this guy's underwater and you can see, pretty relaxed, pretty calm, pretty comfortable being. And this is what we refer to as suspension. It ends up being a meditation, because there's this need to go inside and really regulate the body and to feel the difference between the noise that's in the body and the mind and the signals that are in the body and mind. The signals are the things that we're looking for, the true expression of like, okay, it's time to breathe, compared to the noise being some of the anxiety or fear of holding your breath for long periods of time. which isn't a very common thing for most people. So in order to start this, what I'd like to do is we're going to start with something called breath of fire. And breath of fire is a really nice practice of what we call blowing off CO2. So what you're doing is you're not really getting any more oxygen in your body, you're getting your CO2 levels down. And that the CO2, the high levels of CO2 are the things that cause us to gag when we are suspending our breath, that want us to breathe. It's not a low level of oxygen. So what we're going to do is we're going to lower our CO2 levels so that you can sit in a breath suspension a bit longer than if we just went right into suspensions. Does that sound okay? Okay. So breath of fire, pretty easy. I'm going to ask you to channel what I call as your inner puppy. Imagine that you're a little puppy dog on a hot summer day. You're sitting on a sidewalk. You're panting. So it's and go ahead and start through your mouth so that the breath is coming in and out through your mouth. And go ahead and close your eyes so that you can feel the breath moving in and out. You can also feel the movement of your abdominal, or what we refer to as your navel, as you inhale and exhale. And usually when we start doing these types of breaths, we start with our minds. So we're trying to breathe and trying to do it right. What I'd invite each of you to do is to feel the rhythm of your breath and connect with that and allow your mind just to be watchful as you breathe. Beautiful. If you'd like to, you can take your eyes and roll them up to your brow point, that place right between your eyebrows. That's a way of locking kind of a single point of focus with your eyes, giving you something to focus on. Now I'd like you to invite you to do is to transition your breath from your mouth to your nose. Same breath. And feeling the rhythm. Feeling the pace, each of you having a different pace. Each of you having a different breath, depth. So recognize what your depth and pace is and just trust and step into it. Allow it to flow, to guide you. And as you watch your body settle, and Joe, you said you were tired. Check if that tiredness slowly releases from your body. As you're feeling some intuitive movement to maybe release areas of stress that you can start becoming aware of. If you get to a point where you're coming out of breath with this pranayama or breath exercise, what I suggest you do is to watch your inhale and exhale and see if you can create a balance between those two. So what we're doing is we're balancing the body through breath, and that's going into the nervous system, balancing the autonomic nervous system, relaxing the body, bringing ease and balance, balancing the mind, the hemispheres of the brain, dialing back the left hemisphere, the thinking, analyzing, and just allowing some space to watch, to observe. If there's any tiredness that comes up, you might feel the need to yawn or to stretch. Allow those to come up. Don't suppress those. They're natural somatic releases that happen as we settle in. Beautiful. Keep at it. Trust your pace. Trust your breath. See if you can't settle more into your body. Feel within your body where there may be some resistance to let go. That's the somatic holding that we all do. And find those spaces and just invite them into the breath, into this calmness. Watch as you relax, your mind might drift off, but keep bringing it back to your breath, bring it back to your navel, bring it back to your body. So we're relaxing, but we're also trying to stay online in the most relaxed state that we can, allowing our awareness to be in our bodies, but also aware of what's happening around us. Resisting the urge to drift off or to disassociate. So now what I'd like you to do is if you could take an inhale, completely exhale, and go ahead and take about an 80% inhale and pause. This is the breath suspension. So we're relaxing. Try to keep your chin down parallel to the ground. Allow yourself to relax into your heart center. This isn't an effortful endeavor. This is you're settling and watching. Plenty of breath within the body. And I would invite you as you're sitting there, if you feel a moment of noise, of anxiety, of fear, of static within the body, is to recognize it and to engage it, to soothe it. Not to push against it, not to try to hold the breath, but just to acknowledge and let it settle. And find your breath hold beyond that. When you get to a point where your body tells you you need to breathe, you can slowly exhale and inhale. And to help me know that this is taking place, if you could put one of your hands on your heart center. So Jared, just breathe normally and Joe, as you sit in your breath suspension, you get to a point where you need to breathe. Instead of exhaling, inhale in a little bit. Constantly soothing the body. Constantly finding where that noise is and not letting it gather momentum or engaging it with our minds. And Joe, when you get to a point where you exhale and inhale to let me know that you're done. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So let's go ahead, start breath of fire again. You can place your hands down on your knees. All right, gentlemen, let's go ahead and suspend our breath. Allowing yourself to relax. Noticing the noise that can be in the body, that can engage the mind when that comes into the body. Notice it. Don't fight it. Soothe it. Relax it. Calm it. Let it know that you're safe and that you can settle back in. If you get to a point when you need to breathe, instead inhale in a little bit and keep the suspension. Watch the body. Watch how it starts to activate. And then when you do feel the signal that you need to breathe, just go ahead and gently, slowly, slowly exhale. And then take a nice inhale and exhale. And when you're done, go ahead and place your hand on your chest so that I know. All right, you can go ahead, place your hands down, and let's start breath of fire one more time. Let yourself go, relax into this. This is a fluid effort. The body might resist. You're pushing against patterns. Let's go ahead, take a 80% inhale. Suspend the breath, relax your shoulders, your chest, your back, your face. Just floating in this breath suspension. Watching the noise in the body and the mind, soothing it, relaxing it. Each time you soothe, you find the capacity of your breath on the other side. And if you get to a point where you need to breathe, go ahead and inhale a little bit and suspend a bit longer. Waiting for that signal from your body that it's just time to breathe. And when that time comes, just slowly exhale, as if it's just a regular exhale. And then inhale after you've exhaled. And when you're done, each of you just place your hand on your heart so I know. Beautiful. Perfectly timed. You did that right at the same time. So go ahead. You can place your hands on your knees. Just connect to your natural breath. Relax. And watch. Staying inside. Relax. And watch, staying inside, feeling what has shifted, what has been removed, what's been released, and what's been revealed. All right, guys, let's open our eyes. Nice deep inhale. How you feeling, Joe? You look a little bit more energized.
Yeah, definitely. After the first, I was more energized. The first breath of fire really lit up these points of pain I have in my back, these trigger points that I have. And it was really uncomfortable. And then when we were in the breath suspension, it all sort of didn't go away the entire exercise, but it sort of spread.
Yeah.
And it was less intense, and it was more, I had more sort of inner images of my body, my back. And then the last breath in suspension, I began to have the sensation of moving forward and backwards. Like there was something circulating in my body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you both know we're very patterned creatures. You know, we've got all the patterning that we have, and then we got free will. And you know, when we do these kind of breaths, what I've noticed is they're patterned breaths, even if they're breath suspension, but breath of fire really patterned. And what it will do is it will push against your unconscious pattern. Your unconscious pattern's like, I'm used to holding myself this way. And the breath is slowly releasing that. And you might feel, I could see it a little bit in you, Joe, that there was a little bit of struggling going on at the beginning, you know, because the old pattern's going, I don't really want to release. It's like, I'm comfortable with this. I might not like it, but I'm comfortable with it, right? And then it's just, you know, I always like the analogy of water on granite. Breath is such a gentle modality and it's persistent. Whereas this holding patterns that we have are sometimes like armor or like rocks. And it's just the gentle persistence that slowly erodes and dissolves the rocks. Like you said, they don't go away, they turn into little pebbles sometimes, you know? But with a lot of practice, those will even disappear. Jared, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely had like a busyness in my mind. It was sweet what it went to, like trying to find that, that an image first to soothe, which I thought it's not surprising for me.
Mm.
Um, I think both like the times coming out of it and taking the breath, it was just really interesting how it wasn't like a gasp in or anything. It's like this like dropping.
Yeah.
It was almost like I didn't know if I was inhaling or exhaling, but it was a stepped thing.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of, you know, I think most of us have held our breaths. You know, as little kids, we're holding, and then when we're done, we just gasp for air.
Yeah.
And what we're learning is, you know, that's a lot of the activation of the body, you know, and we're trying so hard, and the sympathetic nervous system's activating. And what we're doing is that noise that we're feeling is the sympathetic nervous system activating. And it's a little bit of static. And then the mind gets in and starts telling little stories about, oh my God, I've been holding my breath for a long time. Activates the sympathetic nervous system. And when we can regulate that, but first we got to have a quiet mind and we got to be in our body to feel that. At a small level, it's very easy to regulate. Did both of you notice that, you know, that stuff would come up, and if you engaged it instead of pushed against it, all of a sudden it felt like you had a lot of capacity after it kind of the noise disappeared?
I think that the last time we did it, I had more. Like, I think I'm figuring out
How did?
like how to engage without pushing.
Yeah.
But the last time is something different clicked.
And one thing I always notice with breath holds, unless you're like a seasoned free diver that just has it somatically embedded in them of how to actually engage the body and to regulate. Most of us, when we do our first breath hold, it's like we're first doing a releasing kind of familiarity exercise. And then the next breath hold, we drop into a little bit more. It's like we've conditioned ourselves, like, oh, okay, I kind of understand this. And usually the third one, both of you went the longest amount of time, about a minute and a half on that one, where you just kind of relaxed into it really nicely. So, yeah, and it's learning how to be with this sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and how that communicates in the body, and how like sensitive we can be aware of that as the mind quiets. So I'm going to drop into the presentation, and I've got a couple slides I'd like to show you. Okay, so just a quick overview of the window of tolerance. is in our body. It's our communication highway. Actually, the big communication highway is the spine. The subtler one is the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. It's all the subtle nervous system that goes out to all the different limbs in the body and brings in all that information into the spinal cord, but then ultimately to the brain. So it's really our information pathways. Sympathetic, activation, parasympathetic, relaxing and resting and healing. When we're in normal regulation, or we feel normal, we're in between these two lines, and we're simply, let's see if I can annotate this. Okay, I'm gonna. Yeah, so we're in the here, and we're simply regulating between this. A less stressful day would look like this. A very stressful day might look like this, where you got a bit more highs and lows. But if we're in our windows of tolerance, it's like we have this ability to manage this and to regulate it. It's actually what we were doing in the breath holds, is we were playing between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and learning how to feel the regulation at a very subtle level. If we happen to step over the sympathetic nervous system, we go into the arousal or hyperarousal phase. And that's like if you really hold your breath for a really long period of time and you get beyond your abilities to manage and regulate your sympathetic nervous system, you'll get into that. That's a fight and flight mode. You'll either want to get the heck out of there or you'll actually push harder. And, we kind of know that in our everyday life. And then hypoarousal is, we typically don't have that within these breath holds, but in everyday life is when we get so aroused and we're at that level for long periods of time. And then all of a sudden we get into the freeze stage, which is the fight, flight, and freeze. The hypoarousal is when, it's kind of like when a deer plays dead. It's being chased, it's going to run. And then when it knows it can't do anything, it just freezes. And it gets into that frozen state. As I said, within our bodies, naturally on a low stress day, we have small peaks and valleys, and we're in our window of tolerance, so we're able to regulate. And then on more challenging days where there's higher stress, we get closer to those levels of either hypoarousal, and then we've got to stop and kind of break and then go back down and then accelerate again. And we learn how to do this in excuse me, in everyday life, with the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and the hypo and hyperarousal. If you can see down here, this is just where we're okay, we're in a good state, and then all of a sudden we start getting into a state right here where we start getting really activated. The sympathetic nervous system starts getting activated, blood pressure increases, heart rate increases, muscles start getting tense. And in this state, what's interesting is, when we talk about working with clients and trying to keep them in a state where we can learn, we can absorb, we can grow, we can learn. When we start getting into this danger zone, it's never a place where we can learn. Survival and learning are like, they don't coexist. Survival is like, I just need to survive and get out of this. What's interesting is this part of the system is where, we've got a sympathetic and we've got a parasympathetic nervous system. In this area, the sympathetic nervous system is getting activated. The parasympathetic nervous system hasn't really engaged, or we haven't learned how to engage it to soothe ourselves, either by breathing, by changing the focus, or getting ourselves in a comfortable environment. If we stay in that hyperarousal place too long, what will happen is eventually we just get into overwhelm. And overwhelm is a time where, I don't know if you guys know polyvagal theories, but it's talks about the development of the vagus nerve, which is really the parasympathetic nervous system. And there's um, the ventral vagus nerve, which is what helps us regulate and to control emotions and the feelings in our body. And then there's something called the dorsal vagal nerve, which actually is down in the hip area. And when the dorsal vagal nerve is the oldest part of the nervous system, when it gets activated, that's when we get into this terror and freeze mode. That's where the cognitive mind goes offline and we're just in survival mode, but we're in survival mode that we can't really even do anything. We're just immobilized. You know, our ability then to be able to reactivate the sympathetic nervous system, but is the parasympathetic nervous system, the ventral part, which is the part where we actually have control. You guys were controlling your ventral parasympathetic nerve or vagus nerve when you were doing those breath holds. That was where you were feeling yourself peak up, and then you could soothe the noise, and then you could come back down and you could feel yourself settle back into something that felt normal. And then you'd come back up here and you'd get back up in here. There would be a point if you just kept holding your breath where you would get into this area up here. And that's the beautiful thing about breath is I don't know many things where we can actually learn in a very controlled environment, a very still environment, an environment where our minds are very quiet, where we can learn to activate our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and to feel how it activates, not at the macro level, because that's when we're usually dysregulated, but at the micro level. And when we're either talking about our personal growth or the growth of our clients, is to give them that level of what I would refer to as sensitivity. So we have an ability to feel what's going on in the nervous system at a very subtle level. But it's also, you know, and you felt this after the second or third breath hold, is you start getting a certain strength within the nervous system too, where you can endure a little bit more. So it has that beautiful yin yang aspect of it where it's like, we're sensitive, we're feeling more, but we're also feeling stronger too. And those two complement each other really well. Because as I hold, I can feel my body activating and then I can soothe it as I'm holding it. And that holding isn't an effortful hold, it's more of a relaxed, just very stable type holding. Does that make sense, guys? So when you look at us as human beings and the whole process of us growing, how much regulation do you think a little child has? Do either of you have kids? I know, Joe, you don't have one, do you? Or do? Oh, you do. Okay. How much regulation do your kids have?
Varying degrees on varying days, but you know, it is sort of this smaller range.
Yeah. So, and Jared, how about you? Do you have kids or nephews or nieces that you've had that experience with?
Yes, friends, kids, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, when we're born, it's like we don't have any regulation actually. Our window tolerance is pretty much zero. You see that with a newborn baby. What they experience is what they express. And then it's through parenting and growing up where slowly we start to expand out this window of tolerance. We get familiar with the experience, kind of like what you got familiar with the experience of breath holding after the third breath. But this happens more over months and years, not over minutes. And it's also the cognitive understanding of like, okay, I'm feeling all this stuff. What the heck am I feeling in the world? And just having a map of what we're feeling helps us to regulate also. Oh, okay, this is what cold is, or this is what hunger feels like, or this is what anger feels like, so that, you know, we start understanding what these sensations are in the body. And we just keep expanding it out. So the interesting thing I've seen with clients is, I've got clients that are, some of them are in their 50s and 60s. And if I had to say their window of tolerance is more along the lines of a 10, 12, 15-year-old than a 30, 40, or 50-year-old. So one of the things I find I'm teaching people often is how to feel what they're feeling and how then to deal with it, how to navigate it, and letting them know that, hey, guys, this is what's happening within your body, giving them a map so they understand what they're actually feeling, so it actually has kind of some tangibility to it. It's just not this intangible emotion and I just don't know what to do with it. It's like, we're working with your nervous system, we're working with your mind, we're working with your body and all the information it's feeding you. So one of the things that I've seen with respects to this, and this applies to the breath that we're doing, but also it applies to movement and meditation and sound. And I put these kind of in order when I'm working with people. What I see is the different levels we work with. First one, it's de-stressing the body, particularly if someone is a bit older. They might not have had a window of tolerance. So kind of like what we were talking about, holding the breath. They've been kind of holding their breath their whole life. And you can see when you hold your breath, there's a physical tension that's built. And when you have that physical tension for years, decades, or a lifetime, it starts building what we refer to as body armor or blocks, places in our body that we're holding deep tension. We've become so acclimated to it, we don't even know it's there. But it is affecting the flow of energy, the sensitivity of the body, and just the calmness. There's a lot of energy to hold that area in tension. So the first thing is detensing the body, is finding out where, like Joe, what you recognize, where I'm holding my tension and being aware of that, and then learning techniques to go in there. And sometimes it's about, it's not just about thinking. Sometimes it's about going in there and breaking up that tension in a way that allows for more space within the body. When I have more space in my body, I have more space with my emotions, I have more space with my mind. And I have just more energy because my energy isn't being used holding that tension. The next one is somatic awareness, and we were doing that with the breath. That's what I really like about these breath holds, is they give us a deep somatic awareness down to our autonomic nervous system, so our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. When you start teaching people how to feel at that level, when the sympathetic nervous system gets activated, if you get someone so sensitive that they can feel the first couple sparks of the sympathetic nervous system and get them aware of what's taking place there, you've given them a tool to be able to manage something when it's super manageable. Where most of us are not aware of that, and we allow tension and stress, or the sympathetic nervous system gets so activated that it's right at the edge of its windows of tolerance. And the saying, the straw that broke the camel's back, well, you're right at that edge, and that last straw got added and you go into a hypo arousal mode. So it's having that real sympathetic or somatic awareness so that you know what's going on. The only way you can really do that, what I've found, is you got to have a quiet mind. If the mind's super busy, it's usually problem solving. It's in a troubleshooting, in a little bit of a fight and flight mode, not maybe fully hyper arousal, but it's tending more up towards this upper part of the window. And if we're problem solving, usually we're not looking inside, we're usually looking outside for something to resolve. So when we can quiet the mind, and kind of like what we were doing with the breathing, how do I stay still enough that I can feel where the noise is, and I can see the difference between the noise and the signal. So I'm looking for the signal, the deeper messages that are coming from my body that are telling me about the truth of my experience. The noise tends to be either a little bit too busy of a mind, or what I find is it tends to be a habitual pattern of how we deal with this tension. We haven't really learned to settle with it. So our mind and our body gets kind of intertwined in a little battle inside ourselves, using up a lot of energy. We talked quickly about this, which was the strengthening the nervous system, is toning the nervous system. So, as much as we become sensitive of the nervous system so we can work up here, we also have to have that male aspect, which is having a strong nervous system, so that when something comes that stresses us, we don't collapse. We have a spine, we have a little bit of resilience, we have the ability to endure. And that's one of the things I see. People that are super sensitive tend to not have a very strong nervous system. So they end up getting either very hyper aroused, very easy, they're nervous, they might be OCD, just nervous and a little twitchy. Or the other way around, people that have really strong nervous systems tend not to be extremely sensitive. They can't feel into things. They can endure stuff. I can go into battle, I can go into hard work and labor, and I can endure and I can do this, but I don't feel the subtlety of life either around me or in me. So what we're doing is we're developing really the yin and yang of the nervous system and our experience of it, which is really the balancing of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Now, as we get these kind of foundational abilities and balance, what I find is that, and Joe, we've talked about this in the past, but that breath of fire, you might have felt this, is you create a somatic rhythm. We tend to be frayed, we tend to be broken apart when we don't have an internal rhythm, something to synchronize on, something to give us harmony in our being. So by creating a rhythm, and one of the simplest ways of doing that, I live in Huntington Beach, people go to the beach and listen to the waves. 15 minutes of that, the system regulates and calms down. Often people might put on some of their favorite music that has a certain rhythm to it, that they're very familiar with, and they easily give themselves over to it, and they can feel their body start coming into wholeness. I think one of the most powerful ways of creating this somatic rhythm, and you felt it with breath, each one of you I saw was breathing very differently during that breath of fire, different breath depth and different breath pace, and each one was uniquely yours. And what's interesting is if you monitor how you're breathing today, you might breathe differently tomorrow because you're in a whole different somatic state. You're having a different experience, but still it's uniquely where you are. So this is a great way to connect with your own deeper rhythms in the moment that is uniquely yours. This is why we're trying to get out of our heads. And I asked you to get into your body and feel the rhythm, because when you start trusting that, that is your rhythm, at least your rhythm for that moment. And that creates a super deep somatic awareness. And then what I find it leads towards is as soon as you add rhythm into the body, your glandular system, the most powerful part of your body that produces hormones and neurochemistry, the big ones, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, oxytocins, possibly DMT. These are all the, let's say, chemicals that give us our emotions, that literally put a lens on how we perceive the world. And as these shift, and we know this from psychiatry and prescription, is that's what they're playing with. They're playing with the chemistry of the glandular system. Western medicine hasn't learned how to teach people to personally change that rhythm and the glandular secretion. So we do it more directly just by popping a pill that decreases the amount of serotonin uptake, which shifts, out of depression and into at least somewhat of a functional way of being. But what we're doing is, it's much more important to be holistic and to use your own pharmacy in your body, because it knows exactly the amount you need and the quantity and the possible regulation. So we're learning all of these things. And what's nice about breath, though breath on the de-stressing the body, it de-stresses the body, but it doesn't do it from kind of a movement standpoint. It does it from a settling standpoint. The somatic awareness, it gives you that somatic awareness and sensitivity. Definitely quiets the mind as we get into the body. Strengthening the nervous system, these breath holds. Can you see how they could strengthen your nervous system? Really toning, like teaching you how to deal, not by effort, but by relaxing into it, being right at the edge of your window of tolerance, the upper level, and being able to just dance there and maybe even drop down into the middle part of the window of tolerance after you've gone up to the edge. And then the rhythm, you can see with the rhythm and the secretion, and I think both of you felt that change, that shift that you mentioned, Joe, from being kind of a little tired into a different state was a glandular secretion. And you change the chemistry of your body. So any questions about this? We can chat about it a little bit. And if you have any questions or maybe your own experience or insight.
Peter, I feel like I want to have a question. It's around clients, or it's around teaching this in a way.
Yeah.
It's around you spoke a little bit to what you find around your clients and the window of tolerance. And I'm also curious how that relates to the rest of these things over here on the left side of the screen with the if we go down from 1 to the somatic awareness and how that plays with the strength of the nervous system. You talked about that a little bit. And is there a way that are there ways that you introduce these ideas or introduce these noticings? I think that's what I'm more interested in, is the noticings when it's noticed, when it's available for them to be noticed in these different places. I'm curious about that because, I'll speak for myself. For me, you can get me right there on all 6 of these things, and I'm right there with you. And some of my clients, they need maybe a way to be noticing these things in themselves when they're doing the practices or out in life.
Yeah, the best suggestion I can give you, Joe, is that as you drop into this and learn this, then what you do is you start making your own understanding of like, how do I walk myself through it? And then, I'm putting these videos online so you can watch them multiple times.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, these are just maps, and this isn't even really an accurate map. It just kind of gets us in the area. But this is kind of a culmination of my experience of all these different maps that I've experienced, both cognitive and experiential, and how I start overlaying them together. And then as I feel them, like, when I'm walking you through breath, I'm actually I don't have a script back here. I'm actually walking through it in my own body because I have the experience of it in me and I'm feeling it. And it's almost as if like I'm walking through the woods and I'm saying, hey, look at this tree on the left-hand side here. Look at the bush over here. As I walk through the breath exercise with you, I'm just noticing things within myself. And what's nice is we're not that different, So what I tend to notice, like, oh, look at, there's this tension building here. Now, how do I address that? As I speak to that, most likely you guys are feeling that or you're going to feel that. So what you're doing is what you're not aware of and what you may not be aware of, the person that's walking them through it is pointing it out to them. And it doesn't have to be elaborate. It's just a gentle tap, like, okay, you're going to feel aware, you're going to feel some tension coming up in your body. Don't push against it. And pushing against it is like our natural instinct. And then as you start becoming aware of this and walking through it in your mind's eye and in your body and expressing it, and you deepen your experience, you will start getting more and more subtler ways of explaining it. And then you can watch the people that you're teaching it to, and you can know, like, hey, this person's a beginner. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to move their body a little bit. We're going to get a little de-stressing going on here. So that, and Joe, we've done this where you do a spinal flex and you can start feeling the tightness in the sacral and the lower spine, something most people aren't even aware of. And then what you're doing is you're releasing that a little bit. And then you just do, like when we first started these trainings, we did long, slow, deep breathing. Long, slow, deep breathing, so easy. Most people don't even know how to breathe. So they're just blown away by just taking time to breathe and let the breath come in and to watch the breath, not just to breathe in, but to use your awareness to watch the breath. And I imagine the breath as being like a little sled, and I'm watching that sled come into my body. And then as I exhale, I'm watching that sled come back out. And by doing that, it does a couple things. Is it, from a quieting the mind standpoint, you're giving your mind a single point of focus. You're giving it, hey, focus on your breath and watch the movement of your breath. And what it does is it starts quieting the mind, but what it also does is it brings the awareness into the body. As you follow that sled into your body, you're going to feel the breath is lighting up different parts of your chest and your lungs and your solar plexus and your navel, and maybe even your hips. And you point that out to people. You know, notice what's coming alive in your body as you're paying attention to your breath and how it comes into your body. Not trying to resolve anything, just being aware. So just like what we did with the physical movement, that you're becoming aware of stressed area, the long, slow, deep breathing gives you a somatic awareness and a quieting of the mind, so you can be aware and become sensitive. These are the basics. So the reason why I oriented these ones right here is you probably want to do these first three, maybe even just the first one first, and then the next time you build on it, it's like Lego blocks. Then you do long, slow, deep breathing and you build on top of that. And then you start doing pattern breaths in here. We did a bunch of pattern breaths. So you really start getting people into this realm here. Then what we're doing is we went a step further today, that we're learning on strengthening the nervous system and toning it, not in a real gentle way, in a little bit more of a challenging way. And then what you can do is, as people become aware of all this, I would maybe put this strengthening down here, and that the somatic rhythm would be the patterned rhythm, like the breath of fire would be up here. And that this would be the last thing you would teach them. But, you know, as you know, when you first started doing this breathing, it's like it's new. And just a little bit goes a long way, because we're just not used to it. And it's like, oh God, I didn't know that was happening in my body. And you point those things out, but the most important thing is, as you're doing this breath, this is what awareness is about, is to be in your body and being really aware of what's taking place in your body, so that when you come out, you kind of know the pathway that you've taken and what you saw while you were in there. Is that helpful?
Very, yeah, that's helpful.
Okay. Jared, anything on your side, or?
Yeah, just, I mean, do you have suggestions for, like, does it make sense to, maybe what's your experience with it, how you use it now, or like when you started, or like what's an advice for us to, like, in practice? Is this like a daily journey, or like, yeah, how do you
Yeah, it is. I mean, you guys know this from the integration with our clients, is that, you might find some material that you want to work on, an old pattern that's not serving somebody, and it's very deeply ingrained. It might be unconscious and it's just coming into consciousness. And the integration part is like, okay, now we're going to start doing things that are going to be starting to create new patterns. Awareness of that old pattern so that you know when it's happening, but also doing other patterns, not pressing on that pattern, not trying to deny it, bringing it to the surface, but then just shifting the energy of that pattern over to a much more supportive pattern or habit. So that's what we're doing with this breath is, you want to talk about patterns. It's like, it is a pattern in the body, and it will push on the somatic patterns of our unconscious mind that, like you saw, Joe, don't want to let go always, particularly when we're at the edge of our window of tolerance, right? We're just sitting at that edge. So yeah, what I would do is, as I recommended with Joe, I'd go back to the videos, and I started with breath of fire and long, slow, deep breathing, and then we did some pattern breathing, and just start learning these basic breaths. And also, just like creating any habit, in order to create a habit, you just can't do it once.
Right.
You got to make it a daily, hopefully a daily ritual. And what I recommend people do, and the yogis kind of understood this, is when you wake up in the morning, when your mind's quiet and your body's relaxed, it's available. It's ready for seeds of new patterns and rhythms to be dropped in, and it receives it much more readily than when after we've engaged the world for the day. So if in the morning you can get people to wake up and the first thing they do, take a shower and spend 5-10 minutes moving or breathing, and get in a habit of doing that, because you can feel the state that you got into from doing this breath exercise. And what I refer to these as is that we're not really adding anything, we're removing things. We're removing stress, we're removing an old pattern. And we're more available, we're more expansive, more energy, more consciousness, more sensitivity, hopefully more compassion. So when we wake up in the morning, if we can connect to that spot in the morning, so it's our reference point, it's our touchstone, that we get as close to who we truly are, then we engage the world. And obviously our old patterns will come up and we'll get thrown off balance and everything. But what's nice is the next morning, you wake up, take your shower, go ahead and connect to yourself and your deepest aspect of yourself. And how many times do you need to get close to that space to recognize that that is where I want to be? Mm-hmm. And then how do you build a sensitivity so that as you're moving through the day, if I make that space so well known, my awareness is not this awareness in the outside world, it's awareness in my inside world. Is when am I dysregulating? Where is my window of tolerance? And am I aware of this? And then how do I know to balance back into this space that I'm so not only familiar with, but it's the place I would like to engage the world from? Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, it's a cool, it's subtle. And what this is really teaching us, all of us, and us being guys, we've been taught how to be in our heads and how to be in the outside world and how to problem solve. And this process is asking not to do, but how to be, how to just come back to ourselves without any mental activity, without any external engagement. And how do I just sense who I am, which is really the easiest state to be in, but it's the state that most of us are most unfamiliar with. And if I learn to be in that state and I learn to love it, and more importantly, it's so subtle, it's so ephemeral that it can disappear like that, that I have to trust the unmanifested or the most essential part of myself. And hopefully if I engage from there, my expression, my engagements, my emotions, all of those come from that space instead of them coming from the outside world. And that's what I mean by we're really taking things away. We're taking the outside world away. We're taking our old patterns away so that we can just be with ourselves and learn to be there.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, this is, I mean, honestly, this is what I'm reading a really great book. If you haven't seen it, it's called Breath. And I recommend you get it. You got it, Joe?
I haven't bought it yet, but it's on the list.
Really great because this gentleman does three things. He goes back in history and he talks about how breath, like in most religions, and he uses different texts, they said breath is the most important thing. And how we breathe, breathing through the nose instead of through the mouth. You know, in our culture, if you call someone a mouth breather, it's not a real great compliment, right? Well, this guy goes in and he uses different texts, but then he goes into like the yogic practices of the different types of breaths, but then he applies it and he goes to places like Stanford and he gets a rhinologist to actually do studies to show what not breathing through your nose for 10 days does to blood pressure, to sugar levels, to anxiety, or even body posture. So really great stuff. I really recommend that book. It's very Western oriented, so I think it grounds and it can ground easily with us. And it integrates all of this stuff in it. So guys, anything else? You know, we ran over a bit. I did want to do a 1 minute breath, but I'm going to hold off on that. We'll do that next training. 1 minute breath, just to give you a background of it. It's a 20-second inhale, a 20-second hold, and a 20-second exhale.
Mhm.
And you do it for 11 minutes, 22 minutes, 30 minutes. And it's the physiology of it is brilliant in respects to learning how to manage the mind, the nervous system, some deep somatic awareness. And what I think is even, we don't go into this in Western medicine, but the process of surrender, of deep trust in the whole experience of life. So we'll do that next time. We'll probably do like 11 to 15 minutes of it. So you get a very deep experience of it.
Sounds good.
All right. Any final comments, questions, or suggestions, or?
Thank you so much, Peter.
No, Peter, thank you for the offering once again. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, trust me, guys, this is great for me because, you know, I'm kind of blending together all these things that I've learned. And I really want to make this very palatable for kind of Western minds, Western clients, so that we have some maps and we know where we're at with clients and we can bring them, like you were suggesting, Joe, how do we bring someone through this process and do it incrementally so we don't overload them?
Yeah.
And that and it serves them more importantly.
Well, I'm loving it.
All right, guys.
Me too. Thanks, Peter.
All right, guys. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah. Good night, Peter. Good night, Jared.
Good night, Joe. Good night, Peter. Take care out there.
All right.